Tonight, President Obama arrives in China on his first official visit to one of America's most important trading partners, one which holds hundreds of billions of dollars of U.S. debt. I'm Russ Mitchell. Also tonight, Sarah Palin tells her side of the Campaign 08 story in a new book that already has some former McCain campaign aides crying foul. Guantanamo detainees wanted. This economically stressed Montana town has an empty prison with plenty of space. And 20 years ago, CBS News found an East German woman making a flight to freedom. After 2 decades, she recalls her headline-making dash and whether it was worth the risk.
This is the CBS Evening News with Russ Mitchell.
And good evening. It is already Monday morning in China, where President Obama is beginning what could be the most important leg of his 8-day trip to Asia. On the agenda, trade, cooperation on stopping renegade nuclear programs, and an up-close look at what some Chinese are calling the new China. CBS News Chief White House correspondent Chip Reid is in Shanghai with the president.
On his first visit to China, President Obama arrived in Shanghai in a driving rain. The challenges here, though, began before his feet even touched the tarmac, with reports that dozens of Chinese dissidents have been rounded up to keep them silent during the president's visit. Mr. Obama will see Chinese censorship firsthand when he holds a town hall meeting with Chinese students Monday. China has refused to broadcast the event on national TV despite White House requests. But it's the economy that will be the source of the greatest tension here. The president wants China to open its markets to U.S. goods to help create American jobs. But with China holding hundreds of billions of dollars in U.S. debt, Mr. Obama is virtually powerless to force China's hand. During a speech in Japan, the president set a positive tone for this visit to China in an effort to build goodwill.
No one nation can meet the challenges of the 21st century alone. And the United States and China will both be better off when we are able to meet them together.
The president will also urge China to do more to stop the nuclear weapons programs of North Korea and Iran, both close China allies. Earlier Sunday, at an economic conference in Singapore, Mr. Obama and Russian President Dmitry Medvedev showed impatience with Iran's failure to halt nuclear weapons development.
We are now running out of time with respect to that approach.
Both men suggested that if Iran doesn't change course, tough sanctions will be the next step, though they failed to say how long their patience will last. The president also had tough words for the brutal military government of Myanmar. With that nation's prime minister in close proximity, Mr. Obama called for the release of Myanmar's political prisoners, including Aung San Suu Kyi, the Nobel Prize-winning opposition leader. The president will spend less than 24 hours here in Shanghai, China's financial capital. It's then off to Beijing, the political capital. That's where he'll have a series of possibly tense meetings with President Hu Jintao. White House officials say expectations for concrete accomplishments are low, and they are probably correct. Russ?
Chip Reid with the president in Shanghai. Thank you very much. And as Mr. Obama makes his way through China, Americans may get a better idea of just how important that country is to the United States. When it comes to the nations the U.S. owes money to these days, China is at the top of the list, and the numbers are staggering. Hari Srinivasan has more.
When President Obama meets with Chinese President Hu Jintao, there may be less lecturing and more listening, because it is hard to talk tough on trade, Taiwan, and Tibet when you're sitting across the table from your biggest lender. The Chinese own more U.S. government debt than any other nation, about $800 billion worth, and the U.S. pays China $50 billion a year just in interest.
President Obama is concerned about taking China on trade, the environment, and a whole host of issues because he's concerned that Beijing won't buy our bonds.
China is carefully watching how the Obama administration spends on bank bailouts, expanding health care, and combating climate change, as any big investor would.
Today, Beijing is asking the Americans very detailed questions about the health care reform proposals, wanting to know how we spend every nickel they lend us.
While President Obama campaigned on the idea that China artificially keeps the value of its currency low, making Chinese goods cheaper and U.S. goods more expensive, this spring, the Treasury Department Department backed off, issuing a report saying China has taken steps to enhance exchange rate flexibility.
What's changed really is China's weight in the world. The capacity that China can bring to bear for good or for ill around the world is just much greater. And so the challenge of working with China in a whole variety of areas is much greater.
China's economy also suffered from the global recession and implemented its own stimulus program, which in turn could stimulate America's economy.
It would offer new opportunities for American exporters because Chinese consumers with money in their pocket would be able to buy competitive American products.
The fact is, the U.S. and China are very closely linked. The challenge is turning common interests into complementary policies. Russ?
Hari Srinivasan, thanks a lot. Here's what else is happening. This is going to be a big week for former vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin. She has a new book bringing new allegations, which have already sparked new controversies, and some new opponents are now firing back. Randall Pinkston explains.
Former Alaska Governor Sarah Palin's new book will not be released until Tuesday, but it is already generating the kind of controversy that Palin brought to last year's presidential campaign as John McCain's running mate. In going rogue, Palin reportedly criticized McCain's senior staff for allegedly pushing her to be interviewed by CBS Evening News anchor Katie Couric, which produced exchanges that dogged Palin throughout the campaign.
What newspapers and magazines did you regularly read? What one specifically, I'm curious, that you...
all of them, any of them.
In an interview for the Oprah Winfrey Show, Palin accused McCain's campaign staff of misleading her about her performance with Couric.
The campaign said, right on, good, you're showing your independence, this is what America needs to see. And it was a good interview. And of course, I'm thinking, if you thought that was a good interview, I don't know what a bad interview was.
Stephen Schmidt, McCain's chief strategist, calls Palin's account fiction. It's not true. Other former McCain aides are refusing to speak publicly. Political strategists say they are not so concerned about what happened in the last election. They're looking at 2012.
You know, they need to hit back. This is about getting contracts for them for the next election cycle. This is about, lining up candidates in the future.
Palin, who resigned her post as governor of Alaska, refuses to say whether she will run for the White House in 2012. One former senior McCain advisor says, this is not the book you write if you want to be president of the United States.
Still, Palin may have reason for now to ignore her critics. She reportedly received more than $1.25 million for her 400-page book, and she's polling well among likely Republican presidential candidates. Randall Pinkston, CBS News, New York.
The Centers for Disease Control this past week quadrupled its estimated H1N1 flu virus death toll to roughly 3,900 between April and mid-October. For more on the outbreak, we are joined by Dr. Anthony Fauci, the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Dr. Fauci, good evening to you.
Good evening.
Despite those numbers we just gave, this past week in this country, the reported number of cases of H1N1 were down. Should we be encouraged by that?
I think it's really premature to get any encouragement for that. There was a little blip down in the pattern of the number of cases. But since flu is eminently unpredictable, I think it's really dangerous to make any assumptions as what's going to happen over the next few weeks or months. It could have peaked and then might come down. That would be wonderful if that happens. Or it could peak and then taper off like this, which means there'd be many more cases of influenza. Or it could peak, come down, and then in the middle of the winter, we could have a second wave. So I think we ought to refrain from making any kind of conclusions about the patterns based on a single week's tally.
Doctor, when it comes to being vaccinated, let's go through these priority groups again. Who should be first in line to get vaccinated?
Well, it's the people who are most high risk for complications, and those are young children, pregnant women, and those who have underlying conditions. We also want to vaccinate the people who are caretakers of individuals who are less than 6 months old, as well as healthcare workers. But the people who are vulnerable are those major three groups: pregnant women, young children, and those with underlying conditions.
Is there a faster way to manufacture the vaccine? There's still a shortage out there.
No, unfortunately not. The only technology that's available for a widespread development and production of vaccine is by growing it in eggs, which is a time-honored for decades technology, but rather fragile. And in this case, unfortunately for all of us throughout the world, the virus doesn't grow very well in eggs and doesn't grow very quickly in eggs. So we're behind on the projected number of doses that we would have liked to have had now. So there's still a gap between supply and demand, which is thankfully closing as the weeks go by, but there still is a gap there. That's an unfortunate, frustrating aspect of what's going on right now.
Dr. Anthony Fauci, as always, thank you very much.
Good to be here.
And still ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, where to relocate the Guantanamo detainees. This Montana town says, right here. Obama has promised to close the prison at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And today, the governor of Illinois made a pitch to bring some of the detainees held there to a prison in his state, which would create thousands of jobs. Prisons in other states are also in the running. And Ben Tracy takes a look at one in southern Montana.
It sits on 40 acres of land on the eastern edge of Hardin, Montana, guarded by thousands of feet of razor wire. Yet all it's holding in are 464 empty beds.
It was a win-win situation as far as we were concerned.
But how has it turned out?
It's turned to lose-lose.
This $27 million detention facility was built to handle Montana's growing prison population. It also promised to bring more than 200 jobs to hard-hit Hardin, one of the poorest places in Montana.
It would have been unreal. That's probably more than it's working right now.
By the time the prison was ready to open, the state no longer wanted it. For 2 years now, Hardin has been stuck with a highly secure white elephant. Prison jumpsuits are neatly stacked, never worn. The kitchen has never made a meal. The entire place is filled with an eerie silence.
We've been sitting empty so long that we got to take a shot at everything. We got to look at everything to get this facility filled.
So they look south, all the way to Cuba, toward some of America's most problematic prisoners.
Now, the second decision that I made was to order the closing of the prison camp at Guantanamo Bay.
But the president has yet to decide where the Guantanamo detainees will go. The folks in Hardin say, bring them on.
If the president says, we're going to bring them on American soil, why not Hardin, Montana?
The city council unanimously backed the idea, and some in town figured Big Sky Country was just where these inmates belonged.
One winter in Montana, forget the waterboarding, and these guys will probably be coughing up all the information you want.
Yet Montana's congressional delegation is opposed, and the prison remains empty.
Hardin desperately needed the jobs the prison would have created, and now hopes for revitalizing this town are fading as the prison remains empty.
Bills are stacking up and money is running out. The prison will now be mothballed this winter.
When you walk around here now and you look at all these empty cells, what do you think?
I see a whole lot of money just sitting there going to waste.
Because filling the smallest of spaces is not easy in a place with so much room to spare. Ben Tracy, CBS News, Hardin, Montana.
Just ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, solemn homecomings at Dover Air Force Base. When President Obama traveled to Dover, Delaware last month to view the return of America's war dead, the media cameras were out in force. So, what happens all those other nights when the president is not there? That's tonight's Sunday Cover, a rare look at the reality of war that the government, until recently, did not want us to see.
Present! Help!
The military does not call it a ceremony, but a solemn event. The dignified transfer at Dover Air Force Base when the nation's war dead are returned to U.S. soil. Until 8 months ago, images like these were officially off limits to the public. Defense Secretary Robert Gates allowed media access last April, but left it up to the families of the dead to choose whether to permit press coverage.
Dover is an experience all its own. Even though it's not a service, it's just like this silence. It's like a peace.
First Sergeant John David Blair from Lawrenceville, Georgia, was killed in Afghanistan last June. His wife, Donna, allowed media coverage of his dignified transfer.
The media's not coming up here to bother me. They're wanting to see, and they deserve the right to see these American heroes come home.
The families have to decide about media coverage right after they have received the most devastating news.
The doorbell rang, and my son come and got me, and he said, "There's two men at the door wanting to talk to you." Of course, when I seen them, I knew, you just don't want to know, but you know.
Since the ban was lifted, some 80% of families have permitted some sort of coverage.
They appreciate that we have the ability not only for them to honor their loved ones, for the public media to go out and have a story, to put a face with a name.
After extensive coverage when the ban was lifted, media attention has waned. For more than a third of the transfers, the Associated Press has been the only agency to send photographers to Dover. When President Obama attended a dignified transfer last month, 24 members of the media recorded the images, which were seen around the world. But the next night, at the dignified transfer of Lance Corporal Cody Stanley, there were only 4 people there to film it, besides CBS News, 2 from the military and 2 photo agencies. Donna Blair believes the press should be there to record the transfers each and every time.
And I feel like they should cover all these guys. This nation needs to know what these guys put an effort to do and the sacrifices they pay for your rights,
As of today, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq have claimed the lives of 5,282 American servicemen and women. We'll be back. Last week marked the 20th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. But months before that historic day, a trickle of East Germans escaping to the West became a flood. Anthony Mason was there and remembers one daring woman's escape and what it foretold in this reporter's notebook.
On a hot August day 20 years ago, Ines Hartmann crouched in a field of sunflowers, trying to find the courage to make a break for freedom past armed Hungarian border guards. The 23-year-old East German, who'd grown up in the communist East, was only hundreds of yards from the forbidden West. And when she ran that day with 3 friends, Ines Hartmann helped set off a chain of events that broke open the Iron Curtain. That spring, the Hungarian government had started taking down the electrified fence along its border with Austria. But guards were still hunting down and turning back East Germans who tried to cross.
They've caught 7 today?
Yes.
And they're looking for 2 more?
Yes.
We don't return to East Germany. Never.
East Germans who were not allowed to travel to the West could visit communist Hungary on vacation, and they began pouring into the capital, Budapest, hoping for an escape route.
This is the Austrian border. From here, it's less than 50 miles to Vienna. The East Germans, lucky enough to make it across, know they won't be prosecuted. And more importantly, they won't be sent back.
It's rare when you cover a story that you realize you're witnessing history. But as the crowd of nervous East Germans, many of them kids with little to lose, began building in Budapest that summer, I remember feeling something was about to burst.
This is the CBS Evening News.
On August 14, 1989, Ines Hartmann's escape led the CBS Evening News.
An exclusive report that dramatically illustrates the changing face of Eastern Europe.
And the dominoes soon began to fall. Within weeks, Hungary opened the floodgates.
And tonight, Hungarian officials decided they couldn't wait any longer,
allowing thousands of East Germans to cross legally into the West.
I am free. I am here, yes. Wonderful, wonderful.
Communism was cracking under pressure. 2 months later, the Berlin Wall would fall. Today, Ines Hartmann, now Ines Faller, lives quietly with her 2 children in the small village of Keilbarau. She recalls that August day in 1989 vividly.
Riesenangst.
I was terribly scared that somebody would come out of the sunflower field and put a gun to my head, she says. But freedom, it turns out, was not all she hoped for.
Man geht ja mit einer Erwartung hier rüber.
I came over with the expectation that everything was going to be better and easier, she says. Actually, the opposite happened. Jobs were hard to find for a while. She was married, then divorced. But she has a small apartment, a job in a clothing store, and no regrets.
Nein. Kurz und pünktlich, nein.
No, she says, not at all.
Es war die Spannung wert.
It was worth the risk, and I have a story to tell.
Ich habe auch was zu erzählen.
A story to tell her children.
I am very proud of her. I think she was a very, brave young woman, and I admire her for that.
When Inez Hartman made her break for freedom 20 years ago, she just wanted to see the world. It turns out she helped change it. Anthony Mason, CBS News, New York.
And that is the CBS Evening News. I'm Russ Mitchell. Katie's here tomorrow. I'll see you first thing in the morning on The Early Show. Good night.